You already know what it communicates, not what you think it communicates, not what you intend, what it actually says. To the room, to the people around you, to anyone paying close enough attention. Your silence is not empty. It never was. And somewhere, in some room, at some point in your life, you felt it. The weight of your own quiet. The way it landed differently than you expected. The way people responded to it. Not to what you said, but to what you didn't say. You may have spent years trying to understand that response. This is what it means. Watch what happens when a quiet person enters a room. Not someone who is simply shy, not someone who hasn't found the right moment to speak. Watch the person who is quiet by nature, who listens more than they talk, who chooses their words carefully, who sits with a thought long after others have moved on to the next one. Watch how the room responds. Some people are drawn to them. Inexplicably, without quite knowing why, they find themselves wanting to be near the quiet one, wanting to say things to them that they haven't said to anyone else. There is something about the stillness that feels like permission, like a space that has been cleared specifically for honesty. They tell the quiet person things, private things, things that surprised even them as they were saying them, as if the silence had pulled something out that the noise of other conversations had always kept safely inside. Others are unsettled. The silence makes them nervous in a way they can't name. They talk more around it, filling the space, covering the gap, trying to dissolve a tension that only they can feel. Their words get faster, their stories get louder. They perform more and more, as if the performance might eventually produce the reaction they are looking for. It doesn't, and the quiet person watches all of this. Calmly, without judgment, without any particular need for it to be different. Both responses are telling, but neither of them is about the quiet person at all. For most of human history, silence was a social signal, not the absence of something, the presence of something else. In a species wired for communication, the choice not to speak carried weight. The warrior who said nothing before battle, the elder who listened before deciding, the person who, when everyone was shouting, simply waited. Silence communicated authority, deliberateness, the kind of self-possession that didn't require external validation to feel real. This is still true, but something has changed in the way modern culture interprets it. We have built a world that is deeply uncomfortable with silence, a world of constant noise, notifications, feeds, conversations that never quite end, spaces that are never quite empty. A world where the expectation is that you will fill every available moment with output, with words, with reactions, with the performance of engagement. And in that world, the person who doesn't perform, who sits quietly while others fill the space, is misread, constantly and systematically misread. Here is what psychology tells us about what silence actually communicates. Research on nonverbal communication consistently shows that silence is one of the most information-rich signals a person can send. It is not neutral. It is not passive. It is actively interpreted by everyone in the room, and the interpretations vary wildly depending on who is doing the interpreting. For people with high social anxiety, someone else's silence reads as disapproval, as judgment, as evidence that something is wrong, that they have said something offensive, created an awkwardness, failed in some social way they can't identify. They replay the last thing they said. They search it for the mistake. They find one, or invent one, and carry it home. For people who are conflict avoidant, silence reads as anger, as the withdrawn hostility of someone who is too controlled to say what they actually feel. They wait for the eruption that never comes. They walk on glass around a person who is simply thinking. For people who process through talking, who think out loud, who need the back and forth of conversation to know what they think, silence reads as absence, As someone who is not really there, not really engaged, not really interested, they interpret the quiet as a verdict on themselves. None of these interpretations are accurate. They are projections. What the quiet person is actually doing is something far simpler and far more rare. They are listening, not performing listening, actually listening, taking in what is being said, noticing what is being left out, registering the feeling underneath the words before the words have finished arriving. The quiet person is not judging, not angry, not absent. They are simply operating differently, processing internally what others process externally, holding space rather than filling it, present in a way that doesn't require constant demonstration. But here is the strange thing. The misreadings matter, not because they are true, but because they accumulate. Because the quiet person absorbs them year after year until they begin to wonder whether the room might be right, whether their silence really is a problem, whether they should learn to perform the kind of presence that comes naturally to everyone else. And some of them do learn. They teach themselves to fill the silence, to speak before they are ready, to produce the performance of engagement even when the genuine version is already happening, invisibly underneath. And something is lost, something quiet and precise and irreplaceable. Now here is where it gets paradoxical, because the silence that makes others uncomfortable is often the silence of someone paying the most attention. The person who isn't talking is the person who is listening, really listening, not waiting for their turn to speak, not mentally composing their response while the other person is still mid-sentence. Actually taking in what is being said, noticing what is being left out, hearing the feeling underneath the words. This is rare. In most conversations, most people are not listening. They are performing listening, nodding, maintaining eye contact, producing the social signals that say, I am here, I am engaged, I am tracking you. But the internal process is already elsewhere, already formulating the next thing they want to say. The quiet person breaks this social contract. Their silence is not a performance, it is actual attention. And actual attention is apparently unsettling, because it sees things, because it doesn't fill the space with noise that would cover what it's seeing, because it creates the conditions in which truth, if it wants to, can surface. So what does your silence actually say? It says you are present without needing to perform presence. It says you are thinking, really thinking, not producing the appearance of thought. It says you trust what you know without needing to announce it. It says you are comfortable with what most people cannot tolerate, the space between words, the gap where something real might happen if no one rushes to fill it. Your silence is not absence. It is a kind of attention that most people never learn to give. And in a world that mistakes noise for substance, that confuses volume with value, that measures engagement by how much you say rather than how well you listen, your silence is not a deficit. It is a form of intelligence, one that the room will not always recognize, but one that the room, whether it knows it or not, desperately needs. Just stay quiet and keep listening.